Hi, this is Janet Fitch, and it is noon on Wednesday. So it is Writing Wednesday, where I answer your writing questions. I didn't think I'd be able to be back. I was in New York until last night, and I got some questions, so I'm up for it. And if you have questions for me in between Writing Wednesdays, write to me through my website, janetfitchwrites.com, and I can design a Writing Wednesday around your question. So, trip to New York was highly edifying and fun, and as usual, you get a lot of inspiration from art forms other than your own. You know, it is good to partake of dance, music, theater. You get more ideas when they are not tilling the same territory that you are, um, contrary to what you might think. Um, you know, a dance performance might inspire a form for a story, or uh, some theater could certainly jar loose a scene, a kind of confrontation, or a way of, structuring a bit of fiction better than a lot of things. So, uh, art. Um, there was a wonderful exhibition about um, J.P. Morgan's um, personal librarian, who was a fascinating woman. We're talking about turn of the century, of the last century. A black woman who, by the time she had graduated from library college and was starting to be working, uh, kind of started, maybe, we would say, passing or distancing herself from her background. Her family were prominent black intellectuals in DC. Her father was the first black man to graduate from Harvard. Um, and this young woman, hi Laura, she read the book, The Personal Librarian. Very interesting. Yeah, I haven't read it yet. It's a novel. So the fact of the person was fascinating. And the first part of the exhibition was about her and her background, um, and the situation of uh, Black people, colorism within the Black community, the church that her family was associated with, kind of pressured out the less illustrious members, less likely to support. So that was very interesting because they were also, big proponents of equality, and it was a very complex situation. And so the wonderful exhibition about her and her youth, um, and then she's falls in with Morgan's nephew, who was at Princeton when she was a librarian in Princeton, and introduced her to J.P. Morgan. It was a time of bibliophile collector, these robber barons, basically, in the Gilded Age, competed with one another for personal libraries, like who had the best collection of documents, manuscripts, etc. And here in Los Angeles, we have the Huntington Library. It comes out of that same impulse. Well, she became his personal librarian, and whether or not he knew that she was passing uh, is an interesting question. But when you see all the things she bought for him, this was a young woman who had millions of dollars at her disposal. What an incredible person. Uh, and it gives an extra layer when you look at these manuscripts, and, like the Crusaders' Bible from 1300 that has Arabic in it as well as Latin. And you think, this is the person who bought that. Um, it gave an extra resonance to the piece. It was to the show. It was really interesting, and so taking that away, there's always things I saw at the art museums that really stimulated me as a writer, and plenty of notes. Um, so now I'm back, and it's AWP here in Los Angeles. So there's a lot of writers in town doing their thing. So that'll be interesting. I have a panel tomorrow at 12:10. So if you're at AWP, um, uh, my panel is in room 515A, and it's about uh, getting out of our own way. So it's a lot of what I'm doing here. Uh, so we'll see you there. I've got a Slow Lightning, the poetry group that I'm working with, and the press. I'll be there at the booth on Friday at 11. And then there's an offsite at 7 at the Makery in Little Tokyo. So if you are going to AWP, uh, there's a little bit. Hey, Christina. Oh, homesick from LA. Yeah, everybody at AWP, I'm going to be heading out there. It's um, probably spending more time on the at the Slow Lightning booth this time rather than running around too much. But it's always fun. The circus is in town. It used to be quite a anxiety producing thing, having all those writers in town and so many different things to choose from. And now I'm just like, okay, it'll unfold the way it unfolds. There's a serendipity about it that you end up exactly where you should be. Um, so today's question is about comic relief. Interesting. So the question is sarcasm the easiest way to add comic relief into a serious story? And I just love that question. First of all, the idea of injecting some comic relief into a serious story or a novel is is such a it's letting the reader breathe. The more intense the story, the more the reader needs to be able to take a breath. So they breathe in and then they breathe out, and you got to let them breathe out because otherwise it's and then they pass out. It gives more uh, dimension to the work when it's not just hitting the same note over and over, where you do have a little bit of comic relief. But is sarcasm the best way to add it? Okay, the question is sarcasm the easiest way? And, as we know from any art form, um, the easiest way is not always or usually the best way. If it was easy, everybody would do it. Um, I was extremely sarcastic when I started writing. That was my dog and pony show. That was my go-to, my trick, my one trick pony. Um, and my teacher admonished me that if uh, that being that sarcasm or that it's too easy, and it's also a defense. It protects the writer against being vulnerable and honest. Okay, so if you find yourself always quipping and you have these quippy characters, and take another look at that. Are you getting as much out of your situations as you could be if you dropped that witty, quippy thing and actually went into the situations that you've created. I've been reading something recently that it just stops me. The continually quippiness is, it's a turnoff. It's so it's a turnoff. Whatever, who cares? But it's easy, and it keeps the writer from really getting um, into. It stays on the surface. It's very superficial writing. So it's under examine life, because the sarcastic personality dismisses, puts down, dismisses. And so you can't get too much more out of the situations that you've set up if your character is constantly dismissing, and the possibility of being affected and changing. Um, I think that so I think that sarcasm is, or irony. Can we say irony rather than sarcasm? Sarcasm is like the cheapest way to go. Good irony is funny, but um, it's not so easy. Like if you read Raymond Chandler, those metaphors are quite ironic. How low was it? How high was it? He was lying in that bag of bones, in that what bag of dirty laundry position that always means one thing. The humor, it's not sarcastic, but it does have an edge to it, because in noir, um, you have a person who's standing up in a corrupt world. And the irony or sarcasm or whatever you're going to call it, um, I think irony is a little more sophisticated than sarcasm. Straight sarcasm is kind of a teenage thing. Um, but irony is the ability to withstand a corrupt world that is corrupt, and you still have to deal with it. You still have to live within it. Um, I think irony is a good way to go. You don't want to hit that too hard throughout. The idea of comic relief is, we always think of it as sort of the clown coming in at halftime, you know, and that's not really what the question is. It's how to add some kind of levity so that the reader can breathe out. I mean, I write very dark stuff, or have, certainly. And for a character to have a moment, a humorous insight, gives the reader a chance to exhale. Um, and how do you add that? There's a bit of a comic turn of mind, of irony. Um, as you watch the tomatoes struggling on the poor actor's windowsill, and might have a comment, a witty comment about that, which comments on his situation, struggling for light. Um, it doesn't have to be sarcasm. It can have a bittersweet quality to it. But you do, have a little bit of comedy. Another way to add comedy, of course, is to have a character who is, the character is in a serious situation, but it is ludicrous that they've found themselves in a situation. Uh, that's a really good way to add a comic note. Is you're all ready for court, or to make an impression of some sort, and um, the cab splashes in the puddle, and you're covered with water, and you can just add that one more bad thing to the situation, or you can have the character just start laughing that this is just too absurd. So absurdity um, is a really good way to add that comic relief. You just, in a serious situation, I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but it happens a lot in desperate situations. Okay, somebody's dying in the hospital. Somebody is. Uh, I always think of a funeral. I went to a funeral, um, and one of my cousins just said something really funny, and it's just like all the cousins are starting. It's not that we felt any less grief for the situation, but that we needed to exhale. And somebody saying something funny and laughing when you shouldn't be laughing and you can't help it, um, is a nice way to sculpt that scene, to add the comic relief, allow the reader to exhale. Um, really, such a valuable tool in your pocket. So you don't ever want to two really intense scenes. We've been talking about orchestrating the orchestration of scenes and the variety of scenes, that you don't want to have two group scenes one after the other. You don't want to have two, you know, just a single person scenes one after the other. You don't want to have two-person scenes. You're always trying to vary it up. You also want to vary the light and the darkness. So if you have a very intense scene, you don't necessarily want to follow it with another intense scene. You want to have something, lighter, or a bit of absurdity. Um, Here you are trying to negotiate, I don't know, getting your mother into a home, and something will happen that is just it's just absurd. It's ridiculous. And the absurdity of life is, often gives you, you know, your sanity back. So just as in fiction, your character, if your character has some reserves, um, will see the absurdity, and it gives dimensionality to the character, it gives dimensionality to the progression of scenes. It gives your reader um, trust in the author, that you're going to not just hammer them over the head, especially if you're a serious writer. You're not just going to be clobbering them over the head, chapter after chapter after chapter, that you are going to give them a wider experience, including some humor, absurdity, um, the contrast of being in a very serious situation and having something funny happen. Um, and maybe everybody else is like, they won't cop to the fact that this is ridiculous. Uh, and you just are, anybody's had a job interview and seen something weird happen, well, and trying to stay with it, but you recognize that this is the absurdity of the moment. Um, it, there's a difference between wit and sarcasm. Sarcasm always seems to be a kind of on the same note, and people tire of it very quickly. If anybody has spent time with a person who is a sarcastic person, um, people get tired of them. It's not a trait that is going to be a protagonist, at least after a while, that they have to drop that, uh, mainly as a human being to develop. But also your reader will not identify with that character. because they get tired of it. It's cheap, it's easy. It is easy. It is the easiest way, but we're not always looking for the easiest way. Yeah, Christina says, sometimes sarcasm feels like a cover for anger. Yeah, yeah. And we'd rather see an acknowledgement of the absurdity of being in that situation rather than continual, um, hitting on the same note of sarcasm. Um, oh, he thinks he's such a big, it's not that appealing. It's not that interesting. It's better to a good characterization, you know. I mean, he thinks he's so hot. Um, looking like a, you know, phantom, like a, a turkey that escaped the slaughter the day before Thanksgiving, or, something like that. I mean, a good metaphor can be very apt. Um, yeah, it can be a cover for anger, but a perpetually angry character um, gets boring after a while. You know, many of us have characters who are extremely angry. I know my newest book that I'm finishing now, my character is always on the, she's always on the slow boil, actually, two characters, but they are very funny. And funny is not necessarily sarcasm. Funny is the way they frame the world, the way they see the world. They see the absurdity. They see the um, people who are stuffy, people who are think highly of themselves for no good reason whatsoever. Um, they have opinions that are funny. Uh, they're Sometimes they say out loud things that the rest of us think but never say. And they just go right ahead and say them. And we laugh because we think so too, but we generally don't say it. So there's a relief in hearing somebody else say it, uh, and it it wakes up the scene when somebody says something that nobody else would say. I have a mother, an elderly woman who's becoming demented, who has opinions that are, she could be outspoken in inappropriate times, and it is funny. It is funny. I mean, there's scenes where uh, the a daughter who's trying to help her is dismayed at what's her mother's doing, but we as the reader, you know understand that. We've been there, some of us, and it's funny. It's like the person who says something, your cousin who says something funny at the funeral, in the back row, and you just can't stop. You can't even look at them because you laugh every time you look at them. And it's a bonding thing, you know. We all feel closer when we notice the absurd together. Um, so yeah, comic relief in a serious story is recognition of the absurd. I think is a better way of thinking of it. Also, if it's something absurd that you have to tolerate, like you're on your job and you're in a it's a shitty job and your boss is a jerk, and but you're going to have to keep this job because it's paying your rent or whatever. You develop these coping humor as a coping mechanism, and it's like, okay, here he goes again. Oh yeah, I know exactly what he's going to do, this and this and this, and God, I'd hate to be his wife. um, you just find, to find the irony in things, it is a way of survival. It's a survival tool. Humor is a survival tool. That's what I was talking about when I was talking about the character having resources. Is that resource is the ability to laugh at something that's actually probably pretty painful, or have that release from your anger in something witty and maybe a little sarcastic, edgy, a little edge to the observation. Um, so, what kind of comic relief do you guys like best in your reading or in your writing? Uh, to have characters who are funny, the way they think is funny. Um, I always have humor in my work. My characters, even though they're serious works, the characters can see the absurdity in things. Um, even just a turn of phrase. But you don't want everybody to be a stand-up comic. Um, I think that comic dialogue uh, is, and that's what I think this writer was talking about. I think comic dialogue is probably the least promising way of handling it. Clever dialogue is good, but jokes, you know, nobody, people generally don't like a jokester too much. After a while, they wear on you. Um, and having more than one is really wearing on you. Um, you pick one acerbic character who can have the note of wit, but don't let no not everybody's Dorothy Parker. Um, Laura says sometimes physical humor, person trips over something. Yeah, in front of the person he's trying to impress, for example. Yeah, and everybody's been there. You're trying to be so sophisticated and you throw your line accidentally over your shoulder. Yeah. um, and you can do that in the middle of a serious negotiation, and maybe nobody notices, or maybe people do notice, and it ups the tension as well as the absurdity of it. So I have another question. Does anybody have questions on this? The comic relief. Comic relief is a good thing. Always keep an eye out for the absurd. Write things down. I mean, my husband wrote a book called Comedy Writer by Andrew Nichols, if you're interested in comedy writing, um, which sneaks in the serious stuff gets sneaked in. Uh, you know, it's a good thing to have in your toolkit that that humor. It just makes more contours in the work. When there's like a humorless, I'm reading, if I'm reading some utterly humorless, serious novel, I it wears me out after a while. It's like um, there's no there's nothing funny. There's no strange coincidences. There's no absurdity. There's no moment of the character noticing their own uh, monomania, obsessionality. Um, I mean, look at Shakespeare. There's always humor. Hi, hi. We got some Blairs here. Was Nabokov's comedy often from absurdity, like in Ben's Sinister, even for dealing with totalitarianism? One character gets stuck on a bridge because he lacks proper permission to exit either side. Yeah, that is really interesting. Nabokov, his comedy, he had layers of comedy. So one of the things that he liked to do was have a serious character, a character who is serious to themselves, um, doing something that we see is absurd, ridiculous. I mean, Pale Fire is the comic work on so many levels. Okay, so what does he do in? Yeah, because I haven't read Ben Sinister, but uh, uh, Pale Fire is this 999 line horrible poem, like a really bad English, you know, uh, classical English poem. And there are footnotes by this scholar who is now annotating um, the poem. And the story unlocks in the footnotes that he was envious of this guy. He wanted to be his assistant or colleague, and it was his advances were resisted, and his complaints about his housing. And I mean, it's funny because we don't expect footnotes to be funny at all, ever expressing the personality of the writer, never. So when you start seeing somebody complain about their landlady or something, it's like you get a character who uh, cannot control himself and is doing something that is terribly embarrassing. If it ever happened in real life, it would be the end of that guy's career. So it's ridiculous. What he's writing is ridiculous. The poem is ridiculous. And Nabokov's, I think the main source of his humor is that he plays with language. He likes to, he's quite acrobatic with his language, and sometimes it's just his word choice is so funny, tremendously funny. Um, and the character, a lot of the comic relief in a Nabokov novel is a character uh, like Humbert Humbert in Lolita, um, who is a very, very bad guy, but a self justifier. So what he sees as heroic, we see as, um, you know, it's it's comic, and it's his way, the character's way of trying to get you on their side is being comic. And we also, through the character's eyes, see his victims, various types of victims. I mean, he is somebody who doesn't like people very much, and his descriptions of people are very funny. I wouldn't say sarcastic, I would say, using irony, using exaggeration, and also understatement. These are tools of, um, of the comedic. Um, uh, and just his use of language. I mean, he's a wonderfully comic writer. Even for dealing with totalitarianism, I'm telling you, especially dealing with totalitarianism, if you are living in a totalitarian state, um, this black humor that we're talking about, the ironic point of view, is an essential survival tool. If you look at Russian humor, I mean, it is dark humor. It is a dark humor, but it's very, uh, for other people who are in that situation, they laugh because there aren't a lot of laughs in regular life, except for, one's control of one's own point of view. Um, so Cedric's mom, hi, Linda, hi. Uh, Jimmy Kimmel's nightly comic relief is the only thing making the current regime antics palatable to me. It's keeping me going. Yeah, because it presents what is intolerable in in an ironic way, and that we can when we're not able to exhale, it helps us notice that everybody's noticing this. It's not just us. And if it's phrased in a humorous way, we're all able to accept that this is what's happening, and laugh together. Um, yeah, humor is a part of survival um, in many different ways. It doesn't have to be a book doesn't have to be humorous to have characters resorting to humor. So Tracy says, I can't believe I'm in a chat with my favorite author. Oh, thank you. Paint It Black made me want to be a writer. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Um, well, here's an example. Paint It Black. This girl has lost her lover to suicide. I mean, it's a tragic, there's tragedy, but there's also her way of looking at the world has a great deal of humor in it. And that's where I think the reader becomes aware of the character's internal resources. If they're able to see sometimes the absurdity, maybe it's not comic to them, but the absurdity of life, um, have a humorous thought about something or someone, it shows there's a character who has some resilience, that they are, that Josie, my protagonist, there are times that we worry that she's going to follow her boyfriend, um, but she has a little pushback in her, which is, we were talking about the relationship of anger, and Christina was saying, the relationship between anger and humor. It's a way the anger, it's like a pressure valve that it lets a little bit of the pressure off, which is why in tough times like the current era, we do need our humor so much. Um, and so, you know, even in a book about suicide, there's humor. It can be absurd humor. Um, it can be just noticing something. And that's what if you read Comedy Writer, my husband's book, Pitch, um, product placement, um, he talks about keeping notes of when you see something and you misread a sign, you mishear something, you make a mistake of some kind, and if you have some internal resources, you laugh at yourself a little bit, this is what I thought he said. Um, Write those down. Those are really, really great, and put those in your writer's notebook of comic, call it comic moments. I used to think I was a tragic character. I was a very dramatic young person and very serious, although I did have a sense of humor. But the older I get, the more I see the humor in things, and it doesn't mean I think the world is all rainbows and ballerinas. I have you know mm, the self on the page, the writer's self, and you'll see this for yourself. Um, Myself as I am in regular life is not the same person um, who puts words on the page. And I don't really know who I am until I see what I've written. And the person on the page is far darker than the person in real life. I've tried very hard to be happy and have friends and, go along with things and not fight the world as much as I used to and all that psychotherapy stuff. But I'll tell you, when you see what you write on the page, that's what you really think is what's on the page. And what's on the page tends to be on the pessimistic side. But there's a lot of humor that leavens it. So, oh, here's, so Halcyon Distilled. I don't know what your name is, but thank you. She was saying to Tracy, I'm currently reading Painted Black. The mom definitely has boundary issues. Oh yeah. Well, uh, Tracy says the boyfriend and the mother, something dark and predatory about that mother-son relationship in Painted Black. Is a very That's a very heavy relationship. It's a mother who never really, never really had a life. I don't know if you know people who especially trained in, say, classical music, dance, some of these arts, especially classical music. The mother is a pianist, and she did nothing since she was like 3 years old but train, practice, 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 train, perform. So she never really grew up. She never really matured like a real person. She never went to camp. She never went to junior high. She never, um, flipped burgers at McDonald's. This is somebody who never had a life. And people like this, when they have children, they have no idea how to be a parent because they're not really people. They're not really three-dimensional people. They're people who tremendous amount is expected of them. They really have to show up. They practice 6 hours a day. They have to show up for their concerts, and it's not enough to be. You have to be great. There in the book, uh, one of the characters says there's no such thing as a good enough concert pianist. There are too many geniuses. So it's an incredibly demanding, um, it's not even a profession, it's an avocation. It's tremendously demanding. And so, yeah, her relationship with her son is pretty, pretty poor. She does not have boundaries because boundaries are formed by the world interacting with you. You're all spiky and you have these ideas, and the world comes and smacks it out of you. Whereas if you've never had that, if people always do what you tell them to do, and everybody's scurrying around trying to serve you, you go off in another direction, as we've noticed with our current cast of characters running this country. These are people who life has not uh, told them what they can't do. They've never had the pushback. Well, they're having it now. Um, so Tracy says, I heard someone in an NA meeting once say their viewpoint of life wasn't rosy and everything wasn't always ice cream and orgasms. No, what a bummer. But those are people who are addicted to the high, you know. So, that's quite a struggle, because life is going to have the highs and lows. And if you understand that you have to roll with the whole thing, uh, that, most people eventually get it, that you have to roll with the whole thing. So people who are addicted to the highs have special problems when it comes to life. Um, Talking about my character in Painted Black and his mother. Yes, her son always needed his Brahms and Mountain Dew. Well, everybody needs their Brahms. I don't know. I have certain composers I use for different things. Bach is the chill out, you know, surround yourself with the divine. That's Bach. And then, for certain other things, like for paying bills, I like um, uh, not Haydn, what's his name? Handel, who's very stately and processional. So I feel like very calm. I can do these, get through my bills or whatever I have to do, something that's unpleasant. Um, very healthy. Uh, oh, well, thank you guys for the praise for Paint It Black. I appreciate that. And there's a lot of humor in it. And your villain can be funny. Um, and that's one of the interesting things about humor is that it we like genuine humor, not the sarcastic thing. That gets tiresome. But if somebody has the reserves to be funny, we give them a little bit more of a break, which is why it's really interesting to have um, antagonists who are funny because it's disarming. We like them a little more than we would like them otherwise. Um, and we also feel for their victims if they're mean. But often they say things that we have thought. So there's recognition. There's a laugh of recognition, which is an interesting thing. I mean, you'll see that on Jimmy Kimmel or any of your late night people, where somebody will say something that's both, shocking sometimes, but also you laugh because it's like, oh my God, I have thought that too. So it's that whole thing. I have another question that's a shorter one, and I can slip it in here, which is talking about, um, again, we can talk about humor, we can talk about there's a line from a film that I love about, um, it's about, it's called The Eye Has to Travel, and it's about the editor of Harper's Bazaar, um, who oh, her name was Diana Vreeland, spelled like Diana Vreeland, who she was very funny, um, and very imperious. And it was one of those films where a lot of people who had worked for her are talking. And one of the things that she would say would be, uh, she was trying to, it was a photographer, a famous photographer in the 60s, and saying the one thing she always said was, don't be boring, do whatever it is that you're going to do, but make it interesting. And I often think of that when I'm writing. It's just like, should I do this or should I do this? You know, is this more realistic, or should I do this? And I could hear Diana Vreeland going, don't be boring. So don't be boring. That is really good. And put some comedy in there, put some humor in. So here's the question: is how can I write the encounter of a main character with the other secondary characters? They are going to be a group of friends without sounding boring. And do I write each meeting one by one? So here's a group. I don't know if this is young adult. I don't know if this is like the group of superheroes, coming to meet, Excalibur. Um, Generally, you're going to meet, you don't want to meet so many people at once that your reader cannot keep track of them, of get a real sense of who they are and what the protagonist thinks of them, and how they're being absorbed. So one-on-one is better, but you can certainly have two at once. You can have three at once if you have a really clear idea of who they are. You can have a character meet three people, but you've got to characterize them very clearly. They have to be very different. If they're the same, then two the same. There's a tall one and a short one, you know. But when you got interpersonal dynamics, meeting at least one of them meet on their own, and then you can meet a small group, like three. If you're at a party, try not to talk to 12 people at once. Meeting a group of, 8 or 6 is too many. Try to meet them in dribs and drabs, and, no more than 3, and then you can have someone join, and then you can have someone join. It's tricky. A multiple character dialogue scene is the hardest thing to write. I have done a Writing Wednesday on multiple character dialogue scene, if you look back in the archives. The two best examples of it when I teach it are, there's a woman named Denise Nicholas, who had been a pretty famous actress and a fabulous writer, did a civil rights movement novel called Freshwater Road. And there is a scene in the local bar in Detroit with 8 people. And notice how she does that. Take a look at that book. She starts with the protagonist of that section, the bar owner. The bar owner comes in, interacts with his bartender. So then you have 2 people. Then someone else comes in, or someone else is mentioned who's at the bar, comes into conversation. So that's 3 people. And then 2 other people in the bar have their own dialogue together. So we meet 2 more people, but they're not necessarily introduced to the protagonist. They're interacting with each other as seen by the protagonist. So there are different ways that you can handle that. Tracy says that my character Astrid in White Oleander became very witty and quippy toward the end. As she got older, she'd lived with her anger longer. There was no end in sight. And then she began to use humor to kind of take the pressure off, I think. Tropical plants grew lush in unkempt yards, said Halcyon Distilled. Very nice. And Astrid had it more together than some of the families she was with. Yeah, she was more mature. She was able to pull back and really see what was happening around her. Whereas that's the kind of protagonist you want, is somebody who can have a range of reactions to things, so that other people maybe can't see what they're doing, but she can. Even if your protagonist doesn't call people out on their shit, they see it. And then there's humor in having people. A really great source of humor in fiction for comic relief is when people think one thing and say something else, because in fiction we know what they're thinking. So if we think that stupid old bat in our heads, and then, oh, hi, Mrs. Green, so good to see you. We smile, we laugh, the reader laughs, because the reader can see the disjoint between the disconnect between what's being said and what's being thought. And we all do that. Not all of us, but most living, breathing adults do it on a regular basis because we have to deal with people. Um, and Halcyon Distilled says, I love Astrid and Josie's heroine journeys. These are the protagonists of White Oleander and Painted Black. Messy, non-linear, I can relate. And let me tell you, my character from the Russian novels, Chimes of Lost Cathedral, The Revolution of Marina M., Marina Makarova, is definitely also messy, nonlinear. She's an enthusiast, unlike the other two girls. She is an enthusiast and comes to see, have a, she develops a much more nuanced view of the world and is able to see the absurdity, but also the tragedy, and back and forth. So it really opens the reader up. So you'll probably enjoy those two as well. So thank you for joining me for Writing Wednesday. I thought I was going to miss this one, but I didn't. So we'll see you next week. And please send your questions to me through my website, janetfitchwrites.com. And thank you very much. Okay, bye.